the local. Good evening. I'm Socrates Garrett, and we're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, right here in the African-American-owned broadcasting studio. We believe digital.com, our own platform. And so it's critically important that in the African-American community, we control the narrative. I look forward to receiving opportunities to show and advertise your products for goods and services and to move your brand along in this community. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. When We Believe Digital Podcast, go to Roku and download our app, and We Believe Global, with shows like this to bring articulate, intelligent conversations and dialogue to our platform. So I'm here to continue sounding the alarm. This is how the South is going to rise again. Good evening and welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi. You know, Mississippi is a great state. It's produced some of the brightest African Americans of any other state in this country, and we're proud of that rich heritage. Mississippi is also a state that has a tremendous past. Some of it is despicable, and yet African Americans continue to rise every day. As Maya Angelou said, "Still I rise." And so when you can make it in Mississippi, but let me just send a shout out there to all black business owners in the state of Mississippi. If you can make it in Mississippi, you can make it anywhere in the world. If you're able to grow a successful business in Mississippi, you would have been able to do so anywhere else in the world. You know, it's twice as hard to grow a business in a state that has a 40% African American population. You would think that would just be the other way around, that it would be easier to grow a business when you had 40+% population that's African American in the state. But it's not. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about why it's not. Now, in the city of Jackson, which is the capital city of the state of Mississippi, right here, the garden spot, you know, it has everything that you would need for it to become a real metropolitan area. When you think about it, Jackson, Mississippi has the Pearl River that runs through downtown. You know, I was out in San Antonio, and they didn't have any water. I was out in Oklahoma. They had created a ditch to try to bring water so they'd have a river walk in Oklahoma City. But in Jackson, Mississippi, we got a major artery that flows right through our city. You know, it's the garden spot. You know, we have I-55 and I-20 that intersects right here in Jackson, Mississippi. We ought to be the commerce hub of the entire South. We're so ideally located. You see, we're 200 miles away from Memphis, Tennessee, 200 miles away from Birmingham, Alabama, 200 miles away from Shreveport, Louisiana, 200 miles away from Mobile, Alabama. So we ought to be the transportation hub in the entire country. But we're not. 42% of Jackson's population lives below the poverty line. Minority contractors get less than 5% of goods and services at the state level and less than 10% on the local level. And yet all of our economic engines in Hinds County are controlled by African Americans. It's a $350 million budget that in our city of Jackson, with 5 African American council people and 2 whites, with an African American mayor. Our county is a $300 million budget in operation. It has 5 African American males on the board of supervisors. Our school district is a $360 million entity. It has 90% of all its board members are African American with a African American superintendent. Our airport authority is a $350+ million enterprise. All of its board members are African American with an executive director that's African American. Over $1 billion flows through our community each and every year. And yet African Americans are struggling. They're suffering with poor quality of life, poor health status, high diabetes, a lot of heart attacks and obesity, poor health care. The state refuses to accept Medicare expansion, Medicaid expansion, because they call it Obamacare. And so we are just backwards in Mississippi. When I point this out, because I do believe the South can rise again, I thought once the old leadership died out that we would be in a better position. But it's not working that way. In many ways, the old leadership was better than what we have today. And we're in a state where Medgar Evers gave his life. Martin Luther King marched in Mississippi, ultimately gave his life up in Tennessee. Vernon Damer down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, gave his life. Struggling, trying to make it better for African Americans. Now, my guest, as always, is Dr. Eldridge Henderson. He's a man that knows many things. He's a renowned speaker and orator that's sought after all throughout this country. I'm going to ask him some hard questions tonight about the status of Black America in a highly populated state like Mississippi and why we don't do better. Dr. Henderson, it's good to have you in the studio, and I wanted to just give you a moment to tell our viewers a little bit about who you are. Most people know you, but some may not. Tell them a little bit about who you are, and then let's get into our discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Socrates. Well, my name is Eldridge Henderson. Currently, I live in Hinds County, Mississippi. I've been back in this area for many years, about 30 years. I had a great opportunity to be born in Mississippi. I was born up in the Delta area, and then we moved to Hinds County when I was a baby. And we had a wonderful opportunity to have a free house. We had free land. We had free food. And anything we needed, we could go to the plantation director and get those goods and services. But we didn't have any money. And I was very fortunate to have all of those free things for 17 years. And during that time, 75% of the black people that I knew around the Hinds County rural area were living on that plantation that I was on or similar plantations in the area. And very seldom did you have any problems in Hinds County at that time. You had total white leadership in every activity that had anything to do with religion, economic development, politics, police, everything. No black people in any position of responsibility. And everybody I knew at that time, Mr. Socrates, had a job, doing their best to attend school 2 or 3 months a year. And most homes had a father in the home during those early years. And now with all the prosperity that you've mentioned, even though you talked about some of the negative aspects, where we have over $1 billion and don't even know how to spend it. You talked about the fact that the new administrators in 4 or 5 different economic sectors in Hinds County and the Metro Jackson area are not managing well because of a lack of leadership ability or potential. And now I'm going to tell you that we don't like to address the fact, but black folks in Mississippi are worse off today than they were when I was on that plantation about 60 years ago, when I didn't have anything to worry about because I didn't know better. So we are back in that category, in that situation. And it's going to get worse in Mississippi economically, socially, politically, religiously. And it's not going to be able to rival those days that I've mentioned when I was living in semi-slavery. That is bad news. And you're exactly right. Things are bad. And eventually we're going to talk about some solutions, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to the folks in Mississippi, the South in the nation and the world. I'm talking about black folks, if we have a chance to get to it tonight.
Well, Doc,
that's my story.
I look forward to us getting to it. We're going to spend some time with this because our people need help. And our people are African Americans throughout this entire country. You know, African Americans are treated the same way regardless of where they're located. We don't gain any respect if we're in Ukraine or if we're in England or we're in the Caribbean. We're not a respected people. Now, Doc, many of us believe that's because we are people without a homeland. And the pilgrimages that people are always going back to the homeland. You know, people who are of Irish descent are always referring back to Ireland. That's their homeland. Asian descents are always talking about where they're from and their homeland. Jews, even over there in part of Palestine, are always fighting about their birthright, their homeland. But African Americans don't claim a homeland. I think there's some sinister about that keeps one's self-esteem very low and keeps us confused.
Well, I must agree with that. African Americans have been led to believe that they are Africans. But you know that is not the case. They don't have a home and never had a home. They were not even respected in America when they first started arriving in the 15th century. They have always been excluded in any kind of codified documents that they put together, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And when we got in the court system, the laws didn't exist for black people. When we got into the area of housing, so-called civil rights, education, religion, all during these series of interventions that I just mentioned, blacks were totally excluded. And this happened all of those years for at least 600 years, and that is why right now black people are considered in America and worldwide an outcast and a member of a permanent underclass, and even most blacks don't expect anything to change in the next 200 or 300 years. I'm talking about worldwide. But in this case, Mr. Socrates, I don't blame others for our situation 100%. I believe we have the ability to do things for ourselves because of one thing, and that is the educational opportunities that we have right here in the Metro Jackson area. We have about 6 universities and colleges here.
Wow.
We have opportunities, about 6 in the metro area.
Wow.
Mississippi College, Jackson State University, Tougaloo, Millsaps. We have Belhaven and other colleges and community colleges in this area, public and private. We should have not one economic problem. We shouldn't have any social problems. And we most certainly shouldn't have any problems in religion that we couldn't address in 30, 60, 90 days.
Now, yet we have all of that, and we continue to see a decline in the quality of life and the standards of African Americans. What causes the continual decline?
Well, it's very simple. Most people don't want to admit it. It's because the leadership is usually handpicked and supported by what I call special interest groups and individuals that have ample resources. And people don't believe it, Mr. Socrates, but there are groups here in Mississippi, in the South, that select certain black people, finance their campaigns, even those they put on agencies and commissions, and those folks usually toe to the rules and regulations that's set by the people that finance them or recommend them on various positions. And in many cases, they're going to vote for the interests of special interests and not their own interests.
Is that what is happening in Jackson, Mississippi, when it comes to the debacle around the garbage collection contract that Mr. Richard and Waste Management have been embroiled in for the last 6 months?
You couldn't have said it better. That's exactly what's happening. So you have to understand, and my people don't like to hear it, and I've been talking about this for a while. Some people don't have the ability to be an independent politician, elected or appointed, because when you're economically dependent on others, you can't pay your bills. The job you have is not paying very much. Some of your spouses in either direction, not working, making as much as you are, and you're making less than $40,000, because most blacks, males in America make about $42,000 or $43,000 on an average. You can't raise a family with $43,000 in an adequate manner. So that's what's happened in Jackson, because they make less than average. You mentioned that there are about 40% poor folks in the metro Jackson area. And that's worse in the rural area. We're in bad shape. And there's no hope unless we start doing certain things that I've been preaching for years. And that is very simple. Looking at your situation, economically, socially, politically, use what you have, your skills and ability and resources, where you are, and start recruiting, training, and putting new people in positions of responsibility, starting in the church, eventually in politics, elected and appointed positions, and you will see a gradually change in what is happening politically, socially, and economically in Jackson, in the South, and the nation. And I'm going to close this by saying this will not happen with the current people in office, the current politicians, elected and appointed. The current corporate leaders are not going to advocate for any change. They love the way things are because they make 99% of all decisions.
Wow. We're getting ready to go to station break, but we're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi. You can find us on YouTube, on Facebook, on WeBelieveDigital.com, also on Roku TV. Our app sits right next to Showtime and Netflix. And so we're trying to get the word out. African Americans must at least attempt to control the narrative and not let everybody else write your history. We're going to talk about some different kinds of things when we come back. We want to understand why we have all these mass killings and what's going on in society and where do African Americans fit in that scenario. We want to talk about the Second Amendment and what that means to African Americans and what they should be doing. Should they be giving up their weapons? So I want you to stay tuned, and you can call in tonight at 800-492-5186. That's 800-492-5186. We'll be right back after this station break.
Socrates Garrett ENT.com is a diversified firm specializing in recycled aggregates and crushed concrete. Socrates Garrett ENT.com's recycled materials provide the construction industry with significant economic and environmental benefits by recycling clean concrete rubble into M.Dot grade rock materials. Recycled aggregates and crushed concrete can be applied to driveways, road construction, bank protection, parking lots, general bulk fills, and more. By using Socrates Garrett ENT.com's crushed concrete products, anyone from homeowners to general contractors can help reduce landfilled concrete waste, conserve natural resources, and gain significant economic savings on materials and disposal costs. For more information, please call 601-896-0084 or visit us online at SocratesGarrettENT.com.
We're back. We're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi. You know, we're broadcasting to over 139 countries. We're broadcasting all over the world, right here from Jackson, Mississippi. We're trying to do our part to save the African Americans from a future that is very dismal. You know, my children will not have the quality of life that I enjoyed, and that's a shame. They're more educated, but yet the opportunities for them are not here. We came up during the period of affirmative action, and we were given opportunities to move into corporate America. You know, my first job was with Xerox Corporation in 1973. Affirmative action and the military opened a lot of doors for African Americans, and black folks moved into the middle class. Now we have a situation where no one wants us. There are no goals, no affirmative action goals by corporate America. We're not tolerated very well, and we have laws that are designed to keep us down. Now, this evening we're going to talk about these mass shootings that are going on in America and how it impacts African Americans. Dr. Henderson, first thing that came to my mind when we have a mass shooting is, was the perpetrator African American? That's the first thing comes to my mind. I hope and pray that the shooter was not black. Why is it that I would have those emotions?
Because of the history of blacks with guns or weapons. Anytime there's a black person, male or female, in the history of America, anytime one protect themselves or cause what we call an incident with a weapon, they better be prepared to die because they know they're going to get killed. So the police will come in groups of 100 or more. A good example was when this Lieutenant Bonner in California killed a few police officers. He was on the force, you know that story. And they finally tracked him down after he killed several people. And they located him at a house. They had over 400 police officers and FBI and others at his area. They shot the house up and burned it down. That's what they try to teach other blacks, not to kill, not to use weapons. And at the same time, when whites do something, a lot of times they will honor them before they take them to jail. You don't see them running to those people, knocking them down, standing on them, putting handcuffs on them. They take it easy with them and take them to jail. And in most cases, they say they are mentally disturbed. But the black man might be mentally disturbed too, but he's going to be beat down or killed on the spot. But the bad news, this is going to be changing in the next 15 to 20 years. It's gradually happening now. Blacks now are getting to the point, Mr. Socrates, where they don't see no hope. I'm talking about the young black person, male and female. And what they are doing now, they're trying to position themselves due to lack of economics, due to mental unwellness, to seek support that they're not getting, and they're getting rebellious. So the trend is usually where the perpetrator is confused and they start calling in threats. That's the first step. And the second step is they're going to start doing the things that other people are doing, going into buildings, shooting and killing and burning buildings down. That's the next role for black Americans in the next 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
It's going to get serious.
Wow.
And that's why you need to talk about that Second Amendment. Which you
right. Well, let's move right into that. There are a lot of people in the African American community that think that we ought to remove guns from the community. I mean, there's a big push for that by the President Biden and Vice President Harris. Do you think that black folk ought to give up their weapons?
I would be very clear. No. Any black person that thinks about giving up his weapon better go somewhere and start digging his grave. Because in just a few years, I tell you, when blacks start using the Second Amendment, start protecting themselves, allegedly because they've been taken advantage of, you're going to find that they're going to need those weapons. So any black policeman, any black preacher, any black corporate leader, or any black anywhere say blacks ought to give up a weapon, they need to be evaluated mentally and see what's wrong with it. Now, nothing wrong with them but history, because blacks have always been taught, you don't need a weapon. And they have made laws to say blacks can only have a weapon when they are supervised in a situation like war. And then, if you're out of the war situation, you're not supposed to have one. That's been the training for black people.
Many people believe that the young African Americans that we see walking the street every day, 9, 10, 11 years old, carrying AK-47s and Uzis, represent the warriors in the African American community. Certainly, if a situation were to arise, that they have developed certain skills and attitudes, and they are not afraid. And so many people see that what's going on in the African American community is scrimmaging. And while distasteful as it may be, old blacks won't take up the fight. And so the future of African Americans lies in its military. And its military is engaged in crime throughout America. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that disagree with that, and you have a right to do so. But as Dr. Henderson said, black people should not and cannot give up their weapons, because history demonstrates that there will be a time when you will need it.
I guarantee you. And that's why the Republicans say we want weapons for ourselves, and they're not too worried about black folks getting weapons, because they know if a black person gets one and he or she uses it, they're going to kill them on the spot. Now, the other black people that are saying, I don't want a weapon, is because they are afraid that they are going to get hurt. But the bad news is, if you don't have one to protect yourself with, I guarantee you're going to be hurt, because there's nobody coming for black people. Now, you mentioned the fact that every group you know, every immigrant, every one of them has a nation or a country they can go back to. Everyone except black folks, and that's a historical fact. The black folks don't know nothing about Africa, and when those Africans were sold from Africa, sold purchase, or whatever you want to call it, they did not have any respect for their countrymen at the time, the native Africans, and they never did come for the people that they sold because they were not controlling their country themselves.
Doug, history tells me that African Americans were treated better in other countries than they were in America. I don't have the statistical proof to prove that, but I think that they were indentured servants in England, and after a period of time you could gain your freedom. But in America, especially in the South, it was a whole different game.
I guarantee. Even for the so-called white slaves that we call mulattoes and quadroons and all kind of things, they were treated as slaves too. But they had a little better position because those folks that were descendant of white males and females, and there were a lot of white females that had children by black slaves, a lot of them. They'd just give them to the little nanny and move on. But the thing is, those folks were treated worse than a regular slave because for you, as a slave owner, you would have a child and you are determined by law that that child is a slave, and you can use him, abuse him, and sell him in slavery, and that's your child. That's worse than a regular slave.
Wow.
And then they use them for what I call immoral purposes in most cases. Those kind of men and women were usually house slaves or the favorites, and they abused them day and night, sexually
Wow.
and otherwise.
Doc, I want to shift gears to the subject of religion. Religion has played a tremendous role in the condition of black folks' mind. Maybe it has kept us alive. Maybe the fact that we're not extinct like the American Indian. Maybe religion kept us alive. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Ain't gonna study war no more. Maybe religion served a purpose that allowed us to get to this point. But there are many who think that religion did us a tremendous disservice. It kept you enslaved. It kept you from reaching out to try and improve your condition because basically you were told that your reward is in heaven. And so the role of religion in the African American community, what's your opinion on how it played out?
Well, you're 100% correct. Religion has been one of the most serious negatives in the lives of black folks as far as education, politics, and economic development is concerned. They were always taught that you don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to take care of you. That's the bosses, the slave masters, the corporate entities after slavery and so forth. And if you do what I tell you and don't rebel and pray and forgive, you're going to go to heaven when you die. And a lot of black people believe that propaganda. They don't read the Bible. Only about 1 out of 50 know anything about the Ten Commandments. And many times I've offered to give people $200 and $300 and $400 if they stand up and quote the Ten Commandments in order. I haven't had anyone to do that in 20 years. And I've made that offer in churches, in community organization meetings, when I would do a speech or so. Most blacks don't know anything about the Bible other than what they are told. And the preachers are not going to be controversial. They're not going to tell the members that they ought to look at what they need to do to take care of themselves while they are alive, such as address and use the 10 Commandments. Look at the constitutional mandate called Second Amendment. Protect yourself. with weapons, and they don't look at them in the church and develop economic opportunities. I was talking to a preacher today, and his church has over $5 million in the bank, and they had so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. Guess what they did?
What?
Build a brand new sanctuary, a brand new church, and told the people, and they have another one in town now that's doing the same thing. You know, this stuff is like a roller coaster. This preacher is telling his folks he wants each member, family group, you know, to give $10,000 for a new sanctuary. And if you can't afford it, if you really want to be saved and be in good grace, you got to give at least $1,000. And he's talking about them poor folks that's not even able to pay a tithe. And they believe, and I talked to some, say, I got to do it if I have to get a loan. I don't want to embarrass my preacher, and I don't want to be accused of not taking care of my church, because I want to go to heaven when I die. And I can't tell you what I told them because it'll be against the law to mention that in public.
We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the deep, deep South. We're talking about issues that are primary interest to African Americans and the conditions that we find ourselves in. And we have to talk about how we got here so that we can craft some solutions on what we're going to do about it. So when we come back after this break, we're going to deal with solutions and what is it that can move the African American forward and stop this deterioration and this decline that's occurring in our community. You know, Jackson, Mississippi is listed as the most dangerous city in America, and we're right here in the religious belt. We got more churches in the city than any other business, rivaled closely by liquor stores. And so the religious belt has not done anything to deter crime. And it's a shame because we recall in Mississippi not long ago when you could leave your doors open, that you didn't have to fear to go out and get gas at night. Jacksonians are afraid. They don't want to go out at night. And that's a real shame. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about some solutions when we come back. We're getting ready to go to station ID. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hi, I'm Q Talicia Garrett. I am here to introduce our New South Development and Training Outreach Hour every Tuesday at 2 p.m., giving you information on how to become a part of the programs through USDA and Farm Service Agency. We can be reached at 678-779-9468. We can also be found online at newsouthoutreach.com.
SGECOVIDsolutions.com is paving the way forward for a safer city government delivering cutting-edge biosecurity and biosafety protocols developed internationally by top virologists and scientists using an all-natural cleaning solution, killing COVID-19 on contact like no other product on the international market. For more information, please call 1-800-281-9080 or visit us online at SGECOVIDsolutions.com. Let SGECOVIDsolutions.com provide innovative rapid facilities testing and world-class state-of-the-art biorisk safety protocols for all of your coronavirus needs. Call 1-800-281-9080 or visit us online at sgecovidsolutions.com.
Welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi. Our call-in number is 800-492-5186. You can find us on YouTube, on Roku TV, on WeBelieveDigital.com, and on Facebook. And so we're getting the word out all across the country. And we're focusing specifically on how we drive our message into social media. So we have a lot of opportunities for talent. So if you're interested in working in a broadcast studio, if you're interested in being an anchor reporter, if you're interested in helping us build this station, we'd love for you to call us, 800-492-5186. Now, we've been talking about a lot of things that are going on wrong in our city. Doc, we got to move to some solutions. I believe you have some solutions you'd like to offer.
Most certainly. I most certainly do.
Would you do that?
I can do that.
Okay.
Now, you've mentioned the fact that we have over $1 billion in this community. And we know that the monies that have been allocated are in banks. Many of the funds, millions of dollars, have not even been decided as to how it's going to be allocated and to whom. And this is one of the greatest things that can change Jackson, Mississippi, Hinds County, and other communities throughout the South and the nation. And black people need to reinvent themselves and restructure their non-programs and start forming compacts and building coalitions, starting with 3 entities. The first one is the religious institutions. The third one is the education and training institutions. And they need to put programs together after they identify what the problems are and address 2 or 3 issues at a time. They put an agenda together, and I've been using this personally for years. They put an agenda together with 2 or 3 things they want to change in their lives or in their communities or in their families. They put a timeline on it, 30, 60, or 90 days. And then they put a checklist together, say these 3 items that I have to address in my life, in my family, or my community. We're going to have this checklist and this timeline, and we want to resolve this problem. And the next thing you do is hire or select a project manager or program director, call them whatever you want to call them, and they are to look at those issues, check that timeline, look at that checklist, and make it happen. And every 30 days, they're going to report to an evaluation team of 3 individuals. And they're going to see that evaluation team, how close they are to reaching that goal in 30, 60, 90 days. They can do this in education and training, in economic development. They can do it in leadership. They can do it in almost any area, but it must start on the local level, and one cannot expect input from the people that are currently in power in the entities that I've mentioned, religion, politics, and corporate America. Because the black people have all the resources they need, and if they get to the point where they have to look at the fact that they must do this training in the churches and then infiltrate those students into public school and have them to seek leadership positions, and you will find changes happening all over the South, all over the nation. If you start locally, where you are, with what you have, with your own leaders, with a prioritized corrective action plan, and then work that plan. Your special interest groups will get scared because they say these black folks in Mississippi, in the South, and in the nation, they're losing their minds. They are making their own decisions. They are pooling their resources in these churches. And right now in Mississippi, in Georgia, Alabama, those Negroes can pool their monies, and they have 10 banks. In 10 months, they are loaning money to their members that are qualified. They have programs in the church where they are teaching the members that are not qualified how to get qualified to get loans. They have done a survey and found out all the number of businesses they have in the various churches in the community. And they're advising their members to buy the goods and services that the member business people produce. And this can change the world. And all this can be started in 30, 60, or 90 days with good leadership, starting on the local level, with local leaders.
Doc, we certainly agree. That is a strategic outline of what we can do to grow effective leaders that change the conditions of African Americans. I want to spend a moment to talk about the 4 economic engines that we talked about here in the African American community. We're talking about solutions. So the first thing that we have to do, Doc, is understand where our power is. We have to understand where the money comes from and where it goes. You see, African Americans, I know when you institute the program that you said, that we'll train them up and they will know these things. But currently, African American leadership is selected from an advocacy group. You know, were you a great civil rights activist? Did you march with Martin Luther King? But does not mean that you have any skill set to run a $350 million enterprise. Matter of fact, you have none, because there was nowhere for you to get that kind of training from. You see, the solution is right there. The economic tool is right there. Now, you take a city like Jackson. What does it really control? Where does it get its money from? Well, it gets its money from property taxes. Property taxes fuel the school system and also helps the city defer its expenses. So its primary source of dollars is property taxes. Then it gets its money from sales taxes. Sales taxes, when you buy something in the city will get 18% at the gas station of those dollars go to the city as sales tax. The 7% or 8% that we pay every day in the city are sales tax. The city benefits from those dollars. Now, most African Americans know about those two. But then the city gets its money from the services that it provides, like drinking water. And it bills its 150 to 200,000 citizens for the water that is provided. So it gets revenue from its drinking water operation. Then it gets revenue from its wastewater treatment plant, because it's able to charge surrounding cities that don't have the population, never should have been a city in the first place, like Byram. They don't have the ability to build their own water and their wastewater plant, and so they hire Jackson to do it. So the city gets this money from this wastewater treatment facility. Then it gets this money from fines and fees. So when you don't pay your ticket and you get a warrant for your arrest, the city gets the fines and fees through its municipal court. And so those are the sources of income, where the money comes from. Now we have to stop and say, where does the money go? Now, Jackson doesn't run its wastewater treatment plant. A company called Viola runs it. And you don't see any footprint from them in this community. There's not one building, there's not one park, there's nothing there that shows that they have a 12-year contract valued at some $30 million a year, and there's nothing to show for it. Then there is the contract for garbage collections. And for 35 years, Waste Management had the contract to collect all of the garbage and charge the city some $360 million, almost $500 million over the last 35 years. And yet, you don't see any footprint of Waste Management in this community. I have not gotten one phone call from Waste Management in the last 40 years to say, can you provide this or that? As the largest African-American contractor in the city of Jackson, from a construction standpoint, not one phone call from Waste Management. And so it allows the money that comes into our city to be extracted by European-owned companies and taken out of Jackson to other cities and surrounding areas. And so how do we stop that? It's critically important for African Americans to know how to fix their problem. Stop allowing all of your dollars to go outside of your community.
There is a simple solution to that, Mr. Garrett. The solution is so simple until when you look at it, you will say, we cause the problems that you address because of a lack of leadership and because of a lack of knowledge, which the Bible expressly prohibits and don't encourage, and because of lack of planning. To give you an example, if you are going to give a contract to an outside entity in another city, another county, or another state, and they have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, any leader with any kinds of training, I mean, a third-grade education, they ought to be able to say to their lawyers, I want you to put a contract together that has the following components. Many people in various states do it every day. I want you to tell these contractors that we have given this proposal to that they're going to have to invest so many $1 million in this city, in this county. We are going to hire our own project manager to monitor the contract. And we're going to have a penalty clause in the contract that say if they are not making progress according to the line items that we are addressed and paying them for, they're going to be penalized financially. And you already have it in your amendments, in your contract, that when we get 2 or 3 extra $1 million a year from these contractors because they are not going to do what they're supposed to do, we're going to put it in infrastructure. We're going to build a new school where they have technology in the system. We're going to build a park down in the rural area or in the black area where the park has been in disuse for the last 10 years. On and on. And we're going to have a contractual mandate that if you don't reach at least 90% of this contract and fulfill the agreement, we're going to take it from you. And have your lawyers trained to do that versus going out of the state and hiring a lawyer that you went to school with, that made a good grade at the local college. He or she is in the sorority or fraternity, and you give them $30, $40 million, and you have a whole legal team that you put together, can't do nothing but do a power of attorney. So the leaders are not hiring professionals, and they want to privatize everything, spend the money to pay people to do stuff that they ought to have their own people doing. The city of Jackson ought to be using this, ought to have his own garbage people that's trained.
So
and on and on and on.
The key to it is to keep the dollars at home.
That's the way to make it.
You gotta stop the migration of the dollars from the community. You got to shut that down. And these leaders don't understand that.
They do not.
And they have so much self-hate until we find that they are great opposition to spending those dollars in the black community. The old crabs in the barrel syndrome is still alive in the black community. We don't like one another. And so we got to correct that and keep those dollars at home. Now, it's either going to be local contractors or it's going to be an internal department that the city builds up to make Jacksonians do the work.
That's right. Let me tell you what the city's not doing, and that's nationwide. Most cities with a population of 100,000 or more, and we said this earlier, most of them have 3 or 4 universities. They have students in public administration, engineering, all kind of technology areas, public policy, you name it. And they could hire those young men and women when they are in college in the first or the second year, give them scholarships, align them to the city for 2 or 3 years. When they finish the 4-year program, when they need those engineers, those lawyers, corporate attorneys, tax attorneys, they give those young people a scholarship to go to law school, go to medical school, go to engineering school, and say, we're going to pay you, give you a full ride, but when you come back, on the basis of this scale we have, if you have $50,000 a year for scholarship from Jackson, Mississippi, you're going to have to serve 3 years once you get out of school. If you have $75,000, you're going to give us 4 years of service. That'll solve the problem in almost any area. Education, for instance. Very few superintendents can find qualified teachers in the STEM area. You know, science, math, engineering, special education. They say we can't find them. But they have students everywhere in middle school, high school, elementary school, that they can train to be the math teacher. They already know who they are. They're the honor students. They put them in internship programs in middle school, high school, and give them special tutoring so they can make 30 and 35 on the college entrance exam, and give those same students a scholarship to study special education, math, science, and say, when you get out, you come into Jackson Public Schools, Hinds County Public Schools, Madison, and do the same thing as outlined with the city officials. Ingrown professionals. And after they do their 3 or 4 or 5 years, they can then go into where they want. But by then, you have them locked in because they're going to have families. You have a clause in your Constitution that they must live in Hinds County or they must live in the city of Jackson. And you build the infrastructure so they want to be here. That'll solve the problem, and you can start doing this in 30, 60, 90 days. And in 8 years, most of these problems can be resolved because black folks don't have but 8 years, Mr. Garrett, to get this together, starting on the local level. And when I tell people this, they don't believe me. After 8 years, if black folks in Mississippi, in the South, in America, don't change and do some of the things that research shows they need to do to make it and be competitive and gain a higher pecking order in economics, education, and other areas, they are going to be doomed for 300 years.
Wow.
300 years.
Wow. We're coming to the end of our program. We've given out some great information. We're going to continue to talk about these solutions. We're going to continue to talk about how you got to close your borders, how you got to control the dollars that you spend. We see where you get the dollars from. 95% of it comes from black folk. We're going to see that you spend that money with black folks in these areas that we talked about. And we're going to teach you how to do that. But you got to be the kind of servant leader that has that as your mission. We're going to require you to do a contract with businesses in Mississippi. You know, Newt Gingrich did a contract with America. You know, Ronald Reagan, not Ronald Reagan, but Donald Trump, America first. All these are code words to let's keep the dollars in our community. Black folk, you don't have to go anywhere to look for anything new. You see what works for every other community. Implement those things. And to our elected officials, Senator John Horn once said that our elected officials are out white folk in the white folk, meaning that they don't afford any opportunities to our black businesses. The state of Louisiana has a 10% preference for any local business in the state of Louisiana. Why doesn't Jackson have a preference for minority-based businesses? Those are the kinds of things that we got to implement in order to turn this thing around. We don't have not one restaurant that we can go sit down and have the kind of meal that they have at Table 100 out in Rankin County, or Bonefish up in Madison County. We don't have not one, and we're the largest city in the state of Mississippi, because we go up, take our dollars up there from a consumer standpoint. We're in all of the outlets in Rankin County from a consumer standpoint, but we don't focus on, we gotta build our own. To our college presidents, the primary function of the college president is to generate enough revenue to run the university. You're not teaching any classes. The primary function is to make sure you have the revenue, and then the other half of that, which you currently do not understand, is to determine how those dollars are going to be dispersed, and wrestle and fight with the college board to allow African-American owned firms to have contracts with our school boards. These are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in the weeks and months to come, until we get a breakthrough, until we get a visionary leader that says, I know how to turn this around, follow me. All it takes is a leader, and the people will follow. But you cannot elect people and put them in a leadership position that they don't have the skill set for. It's not easy to run a $350 million enterprise. And you just can't do that if you haven't had proper training, and you're not willing to spend the nights and the long days reading and putting forth the kinds of ideas that will change the condition of your people. It can be done, and we're going to stay on the wall here at We Believe Digital. Dr. Henderson, it's been great having you in the studio as always.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And to our viewers all over the world, we want you to chime in. And until next week, this is Socrates Garrett Live, signing off. Stay safe.
Advertise on WeBelieve.Global, a brand new digital media platform. Share your brand with our audience on our many global live stream TV broadcasts and over the radio. For more info, visit WeBelieve.Global or call 800-492-5186, option 1.